If your surname is on this list, you're not just Barbadian by heritage. You are the direct result of people who were never supposed to survive what they survived. This isn't just a list of last names. It's a list of people who lived through the worst that colonial Barbados could throw at a human being, and still had children, and still passed a name down generation after generation until it landed on you. Today, we're counting down 17 Barbadian surnames. Some trace back to plantation ledgers, where a person's name was literally assigned to them the day they were freed. Some trace back to Irish and Scottish prisoners shipped across the Atlantic in chains before the sugar economy even existed. Some trace back to Sephardic Jewish merchants who built one of the oldest Jewish communities in the Americas right in Bridgetown. If you see your name on this list, don't scroll past it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand your own last name in a way you never have before. Quick thing before we dive in. If this is the kind of history nobody taught you in school, hit subscribe and drop your surname in the comments. I read every single one. Also, I wrote a full ebook covering the history behind every major Barbadian surname, not just these 17. Link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Okay. Here we go, starting at number 1. Surname 17, Cumberbatch. Cumberbatch is an English surname that arrived in Barbados with planter families in the 1600s, and the Cumberbatch estates went on to hold enslaved people who, upon emancipation in 1834, were recorded under that same name. It's the reason actor Benedict Cumberbatch, whose family history traces back to a Barbados plantation, and thousands of black Barbadians named Cumberbatch today share an identical surname, but come from opposite sides of the exact same history. If this is your name, your ancestors were almost certainly among the enslaved people who worked that land, survived it, and outlasted the family whose name they were forced to carry. And today, more people bear this name with pride in Barbados than anywhere else on Earth. Surname 16, Alleyne. Alleyne is one of the most common surnames in all of Barbados, and it comes directly from one of the island's biggest sugar planting families. Records from the Porter's plantation in St. John show the Alleyne family registering hundreds of enslaved people under their name in the 1830s, right before emancipation. When freedom finally came in 1834, those people didn't get to choose a new identity. They kept the only surname the law had ever attached to them, and they built entire free communities under it. If your last name is Alleyne, you are almost certainly descended from people who worked one of Barbados's largest and most profitable estates, and who turned a name given to them in bondage into a name carried by free Barbadians for 6 generations and counting. Surname 15, Applewhaite. Applewhaite is about as distinctly Barbadian as a surname gets. You will rarely find it anywhere else in the world at any real scale. It comes from the Applewhaite planter family, who by the late 1700s had absorbed several smaller estates in St. George Parish into their own, including one called Walker's. Every person enslaved on those combined lands carried the name into freedom in 1834. Today, the surname is borne almost entirely by Afro-Barbadians, which tells its own story. The white Applewhaite line largely faded from the island, while the descendants of the people they enslaved stayed, multiplied, and kept the name alive. If you're an Applewhaite, you're carrying one of the rarest and most specifically Barbadian surnames on the planet. Surname 14, Yearwood. Yearwood traces back to English roots, likely a variation of Yearwood, a place name from the north of England, brought to Barbados by an early planter family. But the surname today belongs overwhelmingly to Afro-Barbadians spread across almost every parish on the island. That geographic spread is itself a clue to survival. It means the people who carried this name out of slavery didn't stay tied to one estate. They moved, rebuilt, and spread the name through free villages that formed after emancipation, when formerly enslaved Barbadians pooled what little money they had to buy small plots of land the planters didn't want. If your name is Yearwood, your family's survival didn't stop in 1834. It kept going through the hard decades of freedom without land, without money, and without help. Surname 13, Worrell. Worrell has a plantation-era origin like so many names on this list, but it's also the surname of Sir Frank Worrell, the first black man ever appointed permanent captain of the West Indies cricket team, at a time when that decision was a genuine political battle against a cricket establishment that had never let a black man lead the side. Worrell was born within a mile of Kensington Oval in Bridgetown, and his rise from a Barbadian sugar-town childhood to being knighted by the Queen is one of the great Barbadian survival stories of the 20th century. Not survival from slavery, but survival of a system built to keep black excellence in a supporting role. If your name is Worrell, you carry a name that eventually helped rewrite what a Barbadian was allowed to become. Surname 12, Weekes. Weekes is another surname rooted in Barbados's plantation records, but it was carried into history by Sir Everton Weekes, born near Kensington Oval in Bridgetown and raised in real hardship. His talent was spotted while he was working as a groundsman. Weekes went on to score 5 Test centuries in a row, a record that still stands today, and became part of the legendary 3 Ws alongside Worrell and Walcott. 3 Barbadian batsmen born within 18 months of each other, reportedly delivered by the same midwife, who went on to change West Indian cricket forever. If your surname is Weekes, you share a name with a man who turned a childhood shaped by hardship into one of the greatest sporting careers the Caribbean has ever produced. Surname 11, Walcott. Walcott rounds out that same trio. Sir Clyde Walcott, the third of the 3 Ws, born in Bridgetown within a year of Weekes and Worrell. But long before the cricketer, Walcott was already an old Barbadian planter surname, carried into freedom by enslaved families in 1834, the same way so many names on this list were. Today, Sir Frank Worrell and Sir Clyde Walcott are both buried at the 3 Ws Oval just outside Bridgetown, a stadium named after 3 men whose families' names once belonged to the plantation system and who turned those same names into a source of national pride. Clyde Walcott was later knighted himself and went on to manage West Indies squads to 2 Cricket World Cup wins. If you carry the surname Walcott, you're carrying a name that traveled from a slave register to a national monument. Surname 10, Massiah. Massiah is one of the more surprising names on this list. Barbados was home to one of the oldest Jewish communities in the Western Hemisphere, centered around the Nida Israel Synagogue in Bridgetown, founded by Sephardic Jewish merchants and refugees fleeing the Inquisition as early as the 1650s. Over the following centuries, Sephardic surnames like Massiah became attached to enslaved and free black Barbadian families through generations of close and often coerced contact with that merchant community. Today, Massiah is carried almost entirely by Afro-Barbadian families, a surname whose roots run through Bridgetown's old Jewish quarter and whose living descendants have nothing to do with that original community except an inherited name. It's a strange, quiet piece of Barbadian history most people never learn. All right, subscribe if you haven't, and comment your surname below. I genuinely go through them. If you want the deeper history behind these names and dozens more, my ebook on Barbadian surname history is linked in the description and pinned in the comments. Back to the list. Number 9. Surname 9. Husbands. Husband sounds like an odd surname until you know its origin. In Middle English, a husband wasn't a spouse. It was a farmer or a steward who managed land, and the word became a surname for exactly that kind of family. English planters carrying this name settled in Barbados early, and by emancipation in 1834, enslaved people on husbands-owned land carried it into freedom. It's now a well-established Afro-Barbadian surname, particularly concentrated in St. James and St. Thomas parishes. If your name is Husbands, it's a reminder that plenty of Barbadian surnames aren't grand or aristocratic sounding at all. They're ordinary English working words that got attached to extraordinary lives of survival. The kind of name nobody would ever guess carries a story of bondage and rebuilding behind it. Surname 8. Straker. Straker is a distinctive English surname, likely occupational in origin, tied to farming or droving work, that made its way to Barbados with an early planter family. It never became one of the most common names on the island, which is exactly why it stands out. Barbadians named Straker can often trace their line back to a single specific estate rather than a widespread plantation network. That kind of narrow, traceable lineage is a gift for genealogy, because the paper trail from enslaved ancestor to living descendant is often shorter and clearer than for more common surnames. If you're a Straker, your family history may be more specifically documented than you realize. Church registers and estate records for smaller Barbadian plantations have survived remarkably well, which means a Straker family tree can sometimes be pieced together further back than names spread across dozens of estates. Surname 7. Inniss. Inniss likely comes from an Irish or Scottish place name, versions of Ennis or Inch, meaning an island or riverside meadow. Brought to Barbados by indentured servants transported from Ireland and Scotland in the 1600s, many of them prisoners of war shipped across the Atlantic against their will. Over generations, the name spread through both the descendants of those indentured Europeans and the enslaved African families later tied to estates carrying the name. Today, Inniss is an overwhelmingly Afro-Barbadian surname. It's a good example of how Barbadian surnames often carry a double history of forced labor, European indenture layered on top of, and eventually absorbed into, the much longer and harsher system of African enslavement. Surname 6. Broomes. Broomes is believed to come from an English toponymic surname, describing someone who lived near Broome shrubland, carried to Barbados by an early settler family. Like so many names on this list, it was passed to enslaved people on the family's estate and carried into freedom after 1834. What makes Broomes worth including is how concentrated it remains in specific Barbadian communities today, particularly in St. Lucie and St. Peter, suggesting that after emancipation, families bearing the name stayed rooted close to where their ancestors had been enslaved rather than scattering, building free villages within sight of the very fields their families once worked in bondage. It's a pattern historians see across Barbados after 1834. Freedom didn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it meant staying and finally owning a small piece of the same ground. Surname 5. Callender. Callender traces back to Callender, a small town in Stirlingshire, Scotland, meaning this surname almost certainly arrived in Barbados through Scottish indentured servants or planters in the 17th century, part of the same wave of forced and semi-forced European migration that produced the group known as the Redlegs, poor whites who lived in extreme poverty in Barbados for centuries. The name was later carried by enslaved families connected to Callender-owned land and passed down after emancipation. Today, it's a recognizably Afro-Barbadian surname, a quiet trace of a Scottish hillside town sitting inside a Caribbean family tree, carried across an ocean and through two entirely different systems of forced labor. Surname 4. Waithe. Waithe is a rare surname, heavily concentrated in Barbados and almost nowhere else in the world at meaningful numbers, which makes it one of the more genuinely unique names on this list. Its exact English origin is debated, but its Barbadian presence is not. Families named Waithe trace through the same plantation to emancipation pattern as most names here, carried by enslaved people into freedom in 1834, and preserved almost exclusively on this one island ever since. If your surname is Waithe, you're carrying a name so specifically Barbadian that meeting another Waithe almost anywhere else in the world means you're very likely distant family. That rarity also makes Waithe one of the easier Barbadian surnames to trace through parish records, simply because there are far fewer branches for a researcher to sort through. Surname 3. Griffith. Griffith is originally Welsh, a patronymic name meaning son of Griffith, and it made its way into Barbados through indentured servants and planters of Welsh and Scottish descent in the 1600s and 1700s. Like Inniss and Callender, it represents that earlier layer of forced and semi-forced European labor that predates and then gets absorbed into the much larger and longer system of African enslavement on the island. Enslaved families connected to Griffith-owned estates carried the surname into emancipation, and today it's held by Barbadians of entirely African descent. It's one of several names on this list, proving that Barbadian surnames rarely tell a simple story. They tell layered ones, stacked one hardship on top of another across more than a century. Surname 2. Springer. Springer carries real weight in Barbadian history. Sir Hugh Worrell. Springer, born in St. Michael in 1913, became the founding General Secretary of the Barbados Workers' Union, later served as Governor General of Barbados, and was ultimately named one of the 11 national heroes of Barbados by an act of Parliament. Like most surnames on this list, Springer began as a plantation-era name carried into freedom after 1834. But it became, through Hugh Springer, a name attached to workers' rights and nation-building instead of bondage. If your surname is Springer, you share it with a man who spent his life fighting for the same kind of freedom his ancestors' name once had nothing to do with. Organizing sugar and dock workers into a union strong enough to change how the entire island was run. Surname 1. Prescod. Prescod carries one of the most important stories on this entire list. Samuel Jackman Prescod. Born around 1806 to a free woman of color and a white planter father, became the first person of African descent ever elected to the Parliament of Barbados, winning his seat in 1843, nearly a decade after emancipation, in a political system that had excluded non-white Barbadians for generations before that. He's now honored as a national hero of Barbados, with his life celebrated every National Heroes Day. If your surname is Prescod, you carry the name of a man who turned Barbados's brutal history of exclusion into one of its earliest and most significant civil rights victories. A name that quite literally changed who was allowed to have a voice in the country. That's all 17. If you heard your surname anywhere in this video, seriously, comment it below. I want to know how many of you are watching this with your own family history on screen right now. Subscribe for more of this, because there's a lot more Barbadian history where this came from. And if you want the full deep dive history behind these surnames and dozens more, grab my ebook. It's linked in the description and pinned in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.